So let's talk caregiving. I was a young caregiver. I come to this with a deep passion and a real family experience. I call my mom a serial caregiver. She's moved from one caregiving relationship to another. She doesn't generally like when I say that, but it's true. My mother cared for my aging and ailing grandparents. They came and lived with us off and on. My grandfather survived 2 strokes, vascular dementia, and I actually never knew my grandfather as a well man. My grandmother was also an alcoholic. She actually broke her neck in a drunken fall. And so my grandfather's in long-term care, my grandmother's in rehab. And if that's not enough, my mom's going to be a caregiver by fostering a young boy with a disability, cerebral palsy. And Joey came into our lives. So moving from one caregiving relationship to another, I was a part of a caregiving family. I say I come from a long line of caregivers. My grandmother was identified as the primary caregiver to my grandfather, but it was really my mom who really kind of helped and really made it all happen. And in fact, when I was growing up, spending Christmas, waking up and opening our presents, getting all dressed up and going to church, and then packing our lunch and going to the long-term care facility was part of my childhood. Handing out candies with Santa hats in the long-term care facility. This was a part of my life, and I really say it was my mom who really influenced me. And she really never identified as a caregiver, I might add, and my father was there with her. So I'm here both as someone who has made this my professional career, but because of my personal experience. And I appreciate what Donna has shared. It is a very unique and individual experience, but I do think there is something very common and very universal about a caregiver. And I'm going to talk about language. I use the term caregiver, but for the most part, I do see an evolution in our understanding. Care partner. I met Denise, and she was the first one who can use that term consistently. Caregiving tends to look like going one way, giving one way, but really care partner, walking with, beside, together, is something I think is really quite important. So I'm going to kind of reflect on who are caregivers in Canada, and there's some startling statistics out there about who care partners and caregivers are in Canada. And then I'm going to walk you through some of the journey from that caregivers do take, and kind of come into some respite and talk about a shift in thinking as a care partner. So nearly half of Canadians aged 15 and older have provided care to family members or friends with long-term health conditions, disability, or aging needs. That's half of Canadians have identified as a caregiver. That's 13 million who have either been a caregiver, and it's not often I get to sit in a room with the majority of caregivers. And it is a very common experience. It's not if, but when. So this is all new Stats Canada. So the General Social Survey was done through Stats Canada, and there are actually 28% of Canadians who are actively in a caregiving role right now. That's over 8 million Canadians. That's almost 4 million Ontarians who are in a caregiving role. We also know that people provide care at different times in their life, and men and women are both in that role. We often talk a lot about it being a women's role, but more and more men are caregiving. And men peak a little early with the percentage. Women peak a little later in their age around caregiving, often caring for possibly spouse and an older parent. But what's very interesting, and Donna raised it, is that her children, well, she and her husband, you know, created that buffer for her children. I'm sure both her girls had been called into some caregiving roles with their father. And actually almost 25% of caregivers are under the age of 25. So in peak earning and working times as well as family time. So it is, again, a very common family experience. So a few years ago, when I was with VON Canada as National Director of Caregiving, I did some research and working with the programs across the country, and we were looked at what it meant to be a caregiver. And I talk about caregiving as a role, as a responsibility, and as a relationship. So when we talk about the role, it is that process of self-identification. My mom really didn't like the term. She was a daughter, the eldest daughter, and that's what she did. That's what her role was in her family, to care. She moved in actually with an elderly aunt when she was in her late teens and cared for her until she died as well. So again, my mom has spent the majority of her life. Ironically, I got into a cab one time, and you talk to cab drivers. I talk to cab drivers, and he asked me what I was doing. I was coming home from a trip, and I said, well, I'm directing a national caregiving program. I help an organization develop programs for caregivers. And he says, oh, my wife's a caregiver. And I said, oh, well, and actually I found out his mother-in-law actually lived with him. And I said, so you're a caregiver too? And he said, no. I said, do you do things for your mother-in-law? She lives with you. Like, that's a pretty big commitment. And so sure enough, I found out he drove her to appointments, made sure she was, went to church every Sunday, making sure she was able to go to her appointments and the like. And so, but again, didn't necessarily identify that as a role. He was being a good son-in-law. So a role is, it's interesting how you process it and how you come to that kind of self-identification. One of the things about the role is struggling to juggle, is really, I think, as you take on a new role and understanding, like, how do you manage all of the other ones? You're a mother, you're a daughter, you're a wife, you're a worker, you're a friend. How do you really kind of juggle some of those? And so when we talk about taking on a role, that juggling to struggle can really be a challenge. And so how do you manage that? And how do you make time for the multiple roles that you play? And how do you make space for that? I liked how you said that, Donna. Most caregivers are in it for the long haul. Donna's story of 27 years, my mom over 35 years caring for family members. We know that caregivers care for long periods of time. We also know that many caregivers have multiple caregiving roles. If you're in one role, you're often find yourself gravitating towards that in other relationships. And many caregivers actually have more than one caregiving relationships at different stages. I've also come to the understanding that taking on caregiving is actually a social determinant of health. We know that sometimes caregivers don't put themselves first and they put their own health at risk. And so it's really important that taking on this role that you focus on taking care of yourself. And caregiving is interesting because oftentimes it's you talk about the love that's in family and you do it because of love and relationships, but we also know that it's not always loving and it's not always a choice. But sometimes by circumstance you are pushed into a role that you may not have actually accepted or completely understand. So I always open that, make sure that that's a part of my conversation. It might not be your choice, but it is the cards that you've been dealt with. So it's important to understand what your choice is and what control you have over it. And I should say that it's a role with often limited benefits, no vacation, no time off, and very little recognition in our society as of yet. Yet, over half of Canadians have experienced this. But if we just focus on the role, I think we lose sight of the larger piece of what caregiving and care partnering is about. So let's talk about the responsibilities, and the healthcare system loves to talk about the responsibilities. What are you going to do, and what more are you going to do, and how much more are you going to give? And there's always this task-oriented, in particular home care, and I worked for a home care agency, I know all about it. Caregiving is that task, that responsibility. And it varies. We've got people here caring for someone with MS and a care partner with Parkinson's. Those needs are different, but it often comes down to taking on responsibilities, tasks that one may have done before. Talking with caregivers, of a man caring for his wife with a stroke, never cooked a day in his life, and making the plan to bring her home, and he's learning how to cook and going to cooking classes and having to take that over as part of his relationship, and really struggled with that. But they made it through. And he learned a new skill, and very proud of the fact that he could host dinner parties with friends with his new skill with his wife, and it was an important part of his care journey. And I mentioned caregiving, it's not just one way. There's lots of reciprocity, but there's often that moment where you realize, okay, I'm no longer your wife here. I'm kind of moving into that role. My mom shares that story about that relationship with my grandmother, and I share this with you with her permission. My grandmother was an alcoholic, and at times Mom would go up to Elliott Lake. I grew up in Northern Ontario. My mom would get in the car after dropping us off at the bus and would drive up to Elliott Lake, a 2-hour drive, and find my grandmother on the floor, knowing that it was an opportunity for her to kind of cut loose. That was her way of coping. And so Mom cleaning her up and getting her, finding her, and Mom, this is different, I can't do this anymore, sort of thing. And really having those very honest, very difficult conversations about what that meant. And, again, Mom spending that time and really trying to find out where was that give and take, where was that, push and pull, that tension in that relationship, and what was she getting in return. And Mom really struggled with that, because when she did show up and end up over at the long-term care facility with my grandfather in long-term care, my mother would often say, she doesn't appreciate me. My grandmother would never thank. And my mom finally had it up to here after this incident, and of course my grandmother talking about Norman, my uncle, my mom's brother. Norman would come up twice a year to bring my grandmother out to Swiss Chalet and a haircut, and it was like, Christmas, the second coming, and how wonderful. And my grandmother would spend most of her visit with my mother talking about Norman and how wonderful Norman was, and Mom had it up to here with Norman. And ended up over at the long-term care facility meeting with the chaplain, and said, I can't take it anymore. She's an ungrateful bitch. All I do for her, everything that I've done, all of the sacrifices I make, and all she can do is talk about Norman. And my mom had a real epiphany with the chaplain when the chaplain said to her, who do you think she talks about when she comes to see me? And Mom got some perspective and started calling her brother and inviting him up and praising him for doing that. and actually found a way to actually involve Norman in her caregiving and her care plan, and saying, when you come up, let me know. I'll take, I won't have to go up then that week, or because it would always be kind of spur of the moment, and she never really know when it would happen. And sure enough, he started coming up, every 3 months, and making it a real go of it. And Mom really felt that that was a real important part of it. So again, it's that network, it's that give and take, it's the relationship that really is important. The research also talks about that constant vigilance. You talked about it, Donna, as relentlessness, always on call, a responsibility. Sometimes it's that cognitive thinking, lists, my mother's lists, stroking things off. We talk about context, and context can really make a difference. Proximity, my mom for the longest time was a long-distance caregiver, having to travel 2-3 hours in Northern Ontario from Sudbury to Elliott Lake to visit my grandparents. And so being able to understand where, how close it is, how people accept help, and how actually other service providers actually kind of push you into that role. I'm very aware that many times social service agencies will identify the one caregiver. You're it. It makes my life easier. You'll be my gatekeeper out to the network. And then all of a sudden you're taking on all of the responsibility and not understanding who else might be able to help. And if you keep taking on more and more of the responsibility without balancing that out, it can be a house of cards. And when we talk about caregiving as a responsibility, it's labor. There's economic value to that. And actually researchers have quantified if all caregivers went out and strike tomorrow and we had to replace every single caregiver in Canada, it would be worth $25 billion per year. So taking on that role, taking on that responsibility does have value. But if we just stop there, again, I think we lose a dimension of what caregiving is all about. Donna reflected on this. It's also about a relationship. It's caring for and caring about. And not all caregiving relationships are loving. I get that. There are times where it can be very challenging. But it is very much in a relationship that caregiving happens. And it's often more than that dyad, that one-to-one. And we know that it's that network, that care network and support. I ended up being my mom's backup. I was the one that met my foster brother off the bus some nights when my parents went away in my teenage years. I still remember this trip. My parents went for their first trip to Panama City, a warm vacation. My grandfather was in rehab, my grandmother was living with me, and my foster brother was in the hospital awaiting hip surgery. And I'm 18 years old in grade 12, and my foster brother, they were going to delay they were going to do the surgery before my mom went on holidays, but something happened and it didn't happen, and Mom was going to cancel her trip. And the CAS social worker said, no, go, we'll be fine. Don't worry about him, we've got it all under control. So I'm home. So I go to school, I come home from school, I have dinner, my grandmother would have dinner ready, and I would bring her in to visit my grandfather at one hospital, and I would go over to the other hospital, pay for parking, go visit my foster brother, read to him, talk to him, play with him, read the chart, kind of hang out there, and go home. And I did this for a week. But on the Wednesday, I find out that my foster brother is actually going into surgery. The doctor had made a decision to put him in for surgery. And so I go to school, and I was in the shower, and my grandmother got the call and saying, Joey's going in for surgery. So I go to school, and I'm nervous. I don't know what I'm going to find when I go to the hospital. No one talked to me. I'm just the 18-year-old foster sister. Children's aid worker didn't necessarily think to even talk to me because, well, it's routine, but that's my brother. And I'm saying announcements at the beginning of the school. In the morning, I was quite involved in the student government, and I broke down, and I actually broke down on the loudspeaker and ran out into the foyer of the school, and my girlfriend came running and says, "What's wrong?" I said, "Joey's in surgery. I don't know, I want to be there." And so again, I was unrecognized, but I was a very important part of his life, and everyone just kind of saw me as invisible. So it's very important to know who your network is, who you rely on in that support network, and bring them in to that circle. And I challenge now when I do staff training to make sure who is that support? Who are we looking for? It is more than a family affair. There was always jokes in my neighborhood. The neighbors made a sign, Schroeder's group home, for our front door, but family and friends, neighbors were very much a part of our caregiving circle, and would often do the respite, and Betty across the way would look after Joey quite a bit. So it is more than a family affair. It often goes beyond, and more family, friends, and neighbors play a very important role. In fact, in my grandmother's situation, after my mom couldn't get into my grandmother's apartment one day, made friends with the landlord, made friends with the bus driver that transported my grandmother to and from the long-term care my grandfather was, and the chaplain, as well as the post office, the mail carrier, because those, and the liquor store salespeople. Because again, these were people my grandmother saw on a regular basis and really opened up her network in making sure. And if my mom couldn't get hold of my grandmother by phone, she would be calling the landlord, "Can you just go knock?" And making sure she had, that support network. Quality counts. Donna talked about this. It's very important to invest in that relationship, open, honest communication. And we know the quality of the relationship between the person living with the health condition and the care partner really does have a very significant impact on the way you live your life and in that relationship. So investing in improving the quality of that relationship will go a long way in improving, I think, the circumstance and the situation. And I talk about how close proximity, and it's really important to be able to be close. So it is a role, and not everyone actually wears the label, claims the label. But many of us do take on significant amounts of responsibilities. But there are things that you may not need to take on. You might need to give it back to the person. You might need to give it to someone else. But it is very much a relationship that is an important part of your life. And so I present that. And in my work, Silver Donald Cameron is a well-known author from Nova Scotia, and he interviewed a bunch of caregivers in a project I was involved in, and wrote a beautiful book with stories. And he came to the conclusion that if the healthcare system were a plant, family caregivers would be the roots, invisible, fragile, and vital. And I really hold that to be true about caregivers. So let's talk about the journey. And I'm taking this from the Alberta Caregiver Association. They run a program called the Caregiver Compass, and we're going to talk about the full journey from new to caregiving all the way to treasuring caregiving. And not always an easy topic. So as an expectant caregiver, you're growing concerned. Donna talked about those 10 months of stress, not knowing the diagnosis, not knowing what was going on. The focus for you is ask, prepare, research options, and really gather information. That beginning caregiver, you've been caring for a short time. Your key word is about find. Take proactive steps to improve your relationship, your role, and caring for yourself. So seek out the support for you to do that early on. The committed caregiver. My mom used to like to say, been there, done that. It's constant. Your key word is to receive. Be open to receive support, to find balance between your needs and the needs of the person you're caring for. That experienced caregiver, you know, you've been through it all. You know what to expect. You may be at a point where you are helping others earlier on in the journey. And one of the wonderful things about the MS Society and the Parkinson's Society is the way you bring in people with those lived experience to support individuals early on in that journey. This might be a time for you to give back and welcome. Welcome opportunity for personal growth and reflection. I do know I wouldn't be the person I am today without that experience, and Donna shared that as well. Welcome that opportunity for understanding that growth. And not all caregiving is easy. The transitioning caregiver, your role is changing. There are times where, in my own family's life, where my grandfather was placed, my grandmother moved after her broken neck and moved into rehab for 9 months, came and lived with us for a while, really couldn't go back to her own apartment and moved closer. So that time is allow things to happen and walk with your family member. But it is a pivotal time in the caregiving journey of how your role is changing, what you're taking on, what you're letting go of, and being open to. And knowing I've lost 3 of my family members, treasuring caregiving, and when it comes to an end. And Mom has really truly mapped out her treasured life. She handed off that legacy to me. But it is a time to treasure and take the moments and reap the benefits of your efforts. And it's not always easy, but there is a time when caregiving will end. So we talked about caregiving being a role, a responsibility, and a relationship. We talked about the journey and about what you're to be open to on that journey. And one of the real important pieces that I think needs to be a part of your caregiving plan is respite, making time for yourself your way. So on your chairs, I have a small exercise. And I've done this with many caregiving groups over the years, and we're going to take a few minutes. We're going to talk about how you use your time and how you find respite in your life. So on there's 3 lists. And the first list, you're going to write down 6 of your favorite must-do routines. When I get up in the morning, I brush my teeth, and then I go kiss my girls and, you know, wake them up, and I have my morning coffee. Those 6 things that you could not, you almost by, you know, rote, you walk through that routine, and I'm going to ask you to write those things down. You're also going to take the second list, is 6 of your favorite things you do to relax. Might be some of your routine, but it might be something else. Meditation, reading. In one caregiver group, one of the women put up her hand and she says, "Can I put sex down?" I said, "You go right ahead, lady. Go right ahead." So things that you do to relax and do for yourself. And the third list, you know those little chore lists? Take out the garbage, do the dishes, clean the bathroom. Things that need to get done around the house. I'm going to give you a few minutes to fill that out. I still see some heads down, so I'll give you a few more minutes. We're going to work with this list. I see quite a few of you with your head up. Those of you still working on your list, keep working on it. But I'm going to just move along a little bit, because now you're going to actually cross 2 off of your routines. You're going to cross 2 off of your relaxation list and 2 off of your chore list. You got that? 2 off of your 6 routines. 2 off of your 6 relaxations and 2 off of your chores. Donna, look at you, just crossing those off.
Well, I'm just doing what you tell me. I'm not sure I can, though.
You figure that one out. I don't have any criteria. Pick the ones that you least like, the ones that, you know, take less time, you know. You want to just cross them off because, you know, don't think about it, just cross them off. See a few of you chitter-chattering. Which one's you take? Which one's you? So then you're going to take another 2 off of each one of your lists and be left with 2. So another 2 routines, 2 relaxations, and 2 chores. There you go. So what have you noticed about the lists that the things that you have left on your list? Is there any patterns? Which ones were easier to cross off? Anyone like to share?
Couldn't cross off that.
Couldn't cross off half of them.
Things that have to be done.
Most of them had to be done. So it wasn't easy crossing things off. Any other patterns?
Well, some things are essential, so I'm not sure.
So some things are essential.
Just to live, everything.
Yeah.
But you can hire somebody to do it.
Hire someone to do some of that stuff. Exactly. I've been doing this exercise for quite some time because most people think of respite as time, replacement care. I believe it's a state of mind. Respite is an outcome. Respite is a feeling. Respite is how you feel about yourself. And oftentimes we talk about respite is time. And how we use our time is very important to us. And what's important to us about our routines, brushing your teeth, reading the morning paper, giving my girls a hug and a kiss every morning. Like, those are very important parts of my daily life. But I also know that the things I do for relaxation, I sometimes will go put to the wayside. I'll cancel my hair appointment. I'll cancel going to the gym. I'll cancel. But those are important things about keeping me healthy. And the chores, I can cross them off. I can easily cross them off. But as a caregiver, you can't necessarily cross those off. And in fact, sometimes more gets put on your list. And so with several projects across the country, MS was involved in it as well, actually. We came up with a definition. There were 14 projects across the country looking at what does respite as an outcome, respite as a feeling, as an attitude that you bring to your caregiving role and relationship. And when we talked about it is respite is a caregiver's physical, emotional, psychological, social, financial, and or spiritual relief or renewal, which results from support to maintain their own health and achieve greater balance in their lives. So there's something that needs to get in, not just, time. And that emotional part, that guilt, I should have done this, I should have done that. And then a caregiver once, she says, I'm going to stop shoulding on me because, I can't do this anymore. So it is that worry-free, guilt-free time, and really that positive sense of outcome. And one of the first groups caregiver group I did, I thought I was asking, a simple question. What does respite mean to you? And there was a man sitting in the corner and his arms were crossed and he was angry. And he was so not. He was there because he knew he needed the support, but he was angry. And he goes, respite? What respite? And I don't get any respite. Again, that service kind of thinking. I said, if you could do anything, that was meaningful to you, what would it be? And he said, me, my dog, my gun, no phone, no telly, hunting. I haven't been hunting in 8 years since my wife had a stroke. 8 years doing something that he liked to do. Every year he looked forward to going hunting. It wasn't part of his care plan. He never thought to ask for it. He got respite to go to a doctor's appointment, to go grocery shopping, pick up the medication, but at no time was he ever asked the question, what would be meaningful to you? What would give you a break? What would give you a sense of relief? We oftentimes have well-intentioned service providers saying, I'll give you respite, I'll give you 2 hours, you can go off and do whatever you want. No help to support you plan it, no help to you actually do it, not necessarily a whole lot of help to make you feel it. I was pleased to know, and I was just running a support group, and I spoke with him, and he went back and he went to his service provider, his home care case manager, and sure enough that fall he got a weekend away to go hunting, and he made that a part of his annual care plan. Every October, late October, his wife was placed in a convalescence respite bed in a long-term care facility, and he got to go hunting. A very important part of respite. Part of it was, services being arranged, but it was for him finding that meaning. And another example actually from the MS Society, again, young families are affected by MS, and the MS Society did respite funds. So you could apply for dollars to plan your own respite, but it had to be focused on you. And one father actually wrote in and applied for some funding so he could have pizza and movie night once a month with his young family, 2 young boys, and he took over the cooking. And so for a year of a monthly pizza dinners and a movie that he rented, and he made a celebration with his family where he didn't have to clean and cook for that night, but meaningful opportunities to focus on being a father and a husband, and food playing a very important part of that. So think about respite, not just about what other time people give to you. Think about it as useful focus of time, hopefully guilt and worry-free time, and a real sense of, I felt that. I can go back. This is manageable. And as one woman I met as well thought I asked her a simple question too. How long have you been a caregiver? She laughed and she goes, when I married him. I know, it's pretty sad. And she said, when I started noticing changes, that expectant caregiver, I'm not sure what's going on here, noticing changes in his behavior. How about how long go back when the doctor told us he has Alzheimer's? When he got his license taken away? How far back do you want me to go in that journey? How about the time I collapsed and ended up in hospital, and actually her husband was coming home from the adult day program and the bus driver found her on the floor, crisis placement, she's in hospital, he ends up in long-term care, big crisis. Moments in time that on that trajectory, on that journey, there could have been interventions that could have helped her find that balance, find that renewal, that relief to give. And she came to the conclusion respite is not selfish. It's not selfish, and in fact, it's essential. And if that she was going to continue caring for her husband with dementia, she needed to make that a part of it. And it wasn't being selfish. It was about her own identity, her own needs. And she talked about respite. It's not selfish, it's essential. So I'll leave you with that. So I do hope you take that concept of respite and make it a part of that part of your relationship. So let's talk about some shift in thinking. And again, I've taken this from the Alberta Caregiver Association. The old paradigm. I've had this conversation with my mom. Do so you can have, so you can be. That's the old paradigm. We talk about finding ourselves feeling angry, depressed, especially around people in our lives, if we're pushed up against that wall, focused on that doing. And it's often common in our lives because we're actually two people. We're a human being, and we're also a human doing. And they need to live in your same body. And living with one body, trying to get everything done. So one part of you is that human doing, doesn't stop until everything's done, always thinking about others, and always thinking about what needs to get done. My partner's like this, what's next, what's next? I can't keep up with them most days, I can do 6 loads of laundry, and I'm like, yeah, I can't even do one. And then there's the other. Sorry. And we're often feeling bad because we can't keep up. So the new paradigm, and this is one that I, again, have spoken to my mom about, taking time to reflect. Be, so you can do, so you can have. So this is the new paradigm. That other part of you that's a human being, that just wants to be in a relationship, do their own thing, find balance, love, and have genuine connections with the people around you. So how do you balance the human doing and the human being? Caregiving is not a labor of love. It's clear, it's not a love of labor. It is oftentimes a labor of love. What you want to be is you in a relationship. A human being, not a human doing. You're not just the role. You're not what you do, the tasks that you cross off that checklist. But it is very much that change in your mind. We do get caught up in what we're doing and taking on more and thinking of others. But I'm challenging you to think about what you want to be and how you want to be in the relationship as a care partner. What do you need to do? And Donna, I think you identified that quite well. What do I need to, what is my husband's disease? That's his. What's mine? What do I have control over? What do I want to be? And what really does give you respite, that sense of renewal, that sense of relief. So take a pause, between taking on a new task. Think about, is this something that someone else can do? Is this something that, can be done later? Is this a moment that we should cherish right now and celebrate? I celebrated 8 Christmases, expecting to be my grandfather's last. And 8 Christmases were the best Christmases ever, because Mom made a conscious effort to savor those moments and celebrate them in ways that were important for the whole family. I won't mention the time we all got sick and That's a whole other story I'll have to tell you about some other time. But it is about taking pause and focusing on the being, the person you are. Take notice of your feelings when you're in that doing mode. Letting go of the tension, the pressure, and putting it aside. Take time for thoughtful meditation. Be mindful of what you're doing. Ask for support. Dance, play music, make love, hug, don't take things too seriously. All those cliches that Donna shared about. Clarify your priorities of who you want to be and what you want to do. Mom will say that, you know, her legacy was being a caregiver, but she was more than what she did. She is more than what she did. She's an artist, she's a mother, she's a wife, she's a giving woman. Integrate ways of being able to focus on the being in your day-to-day life. Think about the process, not just, you know, crossing those things off your list. And for my perspective, think about participating, initiating the ingings of your life rather than, you know, doing, opening, allowing, nurturing, and making sure you take time for yourself. So in closing, caregiving is a very common human experience, and you're not alone. It is about the relationship, and it's more than just that role and responsibility. You are a vital part of your partner's life, and it's important for you to nurture that and feed that as the roots of that system. Caregiving is also a journey, so plan ahead. Respite, think about it. It is essential. Make it a part of your plan. And for you, it is to focus on you as that human being. And I'll leave you with a lovely Chinese proverb. I did a group with a group of Chinese caregivers. They were lots of fun. If you want happiness for an hour, take a nap. If you want happiness for a day, go fishing. If you want happiness for a month, get married. If you want happiness for a year, inherit a fortune. If you want happiness for a lifetime, care for someone else. We do live in a very caring society, and I thank you for what you do in your life as care partners, but it is important to take care of yourself. And I'll leave you with that. So I was just pointed, and do you have any questions for me? Well,
in all of your work, how do you find that society is relating now to being, you know, to care partners? Because for a long time, the focus is on the role of the person being ill, like
yeah.
the role of the sick, versus the part of the people involved, the parameters. So how do you find that changing, moving, the same?
Yeah. So Donna had asked, you know, how is society kind of reflecting on caregivers and seeing caregivers? I've been involved in a lot of organizations. Did you know there was the Canadian Caregiver Coalition? There's a national advocacy organization advocating on the rights and needs of caregivers across this country. There's a patchwork of provincial organizations, including the Ontario Caregiver Coalition, that are coming together with, you know, service providers, healthcare organizations, caregivers themselves, who are advocating for caregiver needs. I don't think we're there. I do think their caregivers are still unrecognized, undervalued. but we're starting to see some changes in policy. The federal caregiver tax credit, we're starting to see more respite hours being identified. Manitoba has a Caregiver Recognition Act, a whole piece of legislation, all on caregiving. Who knew? So I think there's political will. I do think there is support in kind of the healthcare, home care field to advocate, but we don't necessarily have an understanding that you're a care partner. You're identified as, okay, what, home care assessment, you're not assessed for your own needs. You're assessed of how much can you do, how much can you take on, and how much is this, is this actually, are you unable to cope? Do you think they're better off somewhere else? Those are kind of the questions you get, but really don't necessarily take you in that context as a care partner. They see you very peripheral. So I think we still need a long way to go, but I do think there are some good organizations out there advocating, like the Parkinson's and the MS Society, that belong to the Ontario Caregiver Coalition, so advocating for the rights.
Where can we get more information on the tax credit for caregivers?
Go to the Canada Revenue Agency, and when you fill out your forms, there's 2 lines actually in your tax returns. And it's the caregiver amount and then the primary family caregiver amount. And depending on if you're living with the person, most seniors agencies also do tax returns. If you have a complicated medical expenses, go down to one of the seniors resource centers that do the tax returns and ask those questions. How much of my medical expenses? Can I write off some of my respite expenses? Do I qualify for the caregiver amount? It's a small bit of money. And it actually reduces the amount of tax you pay. It doesn't, it's complicated, but there is a recognition in the tax for credit. And call the MS Society and Parkinson's, they should know too. Denise looks at me and goes, don't send them here. I'll send you some information, but the Canada Revenue Agency caregiver amount and the primary family caregiver amount are 2, and depending on if you live with a bunch of other kind of criteria, I would make sure you find out about them.
Just to remind people too, not to forget about the disability tax credit. So many people don't realize.
Yeah, so there's a bunch of financial tax credits. So yeah, the disability amount, the medical expenses, the caregiver amount, the dependent, and really go and use, there's lots of accountants that do free income tax returns at seniors organizations, and go down and find out because they're in the know, and see if you can access those. Who knew I was going to be talking about tax credits tonight?
There's also a renovation tax.
Yeah.
Every year you get $1,200.
Yeah, and that's an Ontario home renovation tax credit if you're going to be modifying your home for a disability. So all these little things, all these little pockets of different things that you need to go out and find out about. It's not just, the services or the support. There's also kind of tax credits. Who knew? Thank you.